Good, good evening, afternoon, wherever you might be. Good night, whatever is your flavor. Hello, my name is Jonathan Stafford from the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, and I am the Culture and Engagement Manager at our organization. That is a whole lot of words to say that I am the person who is responsible for helping our organization push forth our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, both internally at WABA, but also externally throughout the city as we look to make as we look to make safe streets for everyone. Sorry, Gary, I am seeing a timer slide deck on the screen.
Oh, interesting.
My screen, can we? Yeah.
That's good to know. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out to be here with us today. I certainly appreciate, and we will be respectful of your time. Throughout today, we will be sharing our experiences about how we have come to learn how to get certain things done with the city and with the Department of Transportation, as well as we're looking to you to inform us about where your interests lie. We want to support the work that you all are doing in your communities. We want to support you all in the sense of we want to be there. We want to be good allies in your community, as well as we have resources and we want to make those available to you. Whatever we can do to ensure that you have what you need and that we're being a good partner to you. One of the things I think we need to pop into is what is our code of conduct. And so our code of conduct basically, thank you. Our code of conduct basically says, I won't read all of this to you. You can find it at waba.org/code. It's really important. I'm going to leave these on the screen for just a moment. I'll highlight some of the things that are really vitally important to how we move throughout our conversation today, as well as how we intend to be a partner and to be good allies in our communities. I agree that I have a responsibility to interrogate all of my privileges and use the power that I have to help make WABA spaces increasingly safe, inclusive, and supportive for everyone. We hold that as a strong tenet at our organization. And I agree that these actions have, I acknowledge that WABA has a zero tolerance policy. I think this is the biggest one. I acknowledge that WABA has a zero tolerance policy for racist behavior, sexual harassment, physical or verbal abuse, microaggression, tokenism, and all other harmful actions. And I agree that these actions have no place in a supportive, inclusive community, and to make it a priority to never harm any other person in any of these ways. Next. I agree to be respectful, kind, compassionate, supportive to those around me in both word and in action. And if someone lets me know that my behavior is harmful, to immediately adjust that behavior with the goal of preventing future harm. I agree to take responsibility of speaking out against instances of racism, sexism, ableism, and other discrimination or manifestations of prejudice wherever I have the power to do so. Last one. I want you all to know this. If you experience a code of conduct violation at the hands of another participant, WABA staff or a volunteer, or witness unjust behaviors by another individual at a WABA event, please notify a WABA staff member. And that's here on the call, that's myself and Garrett Hennigan, and I think we may be joined by another person. I just can't see everyone right now. But you can find out more at waba.org/code. And I thank you all for participating in a just and equitable manner to this meeting. today we will be experiencing what I hope will be uh, some fruitful dialogue and a wealth of knowledge and information from one of our lead organizers at WABA. Garrett Hennigan is at the Washington Area Bicycle Association. He is our guru of all things campaign happening around the city. Generally, if I don't know of a campaign that is ongoing, I usually tap Garrett, and Garrett's the person. He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," or "It's stalled," or "It's in this," or "It's completed." He usually has it all in his orbit. But he's also had to work through a lot of how getting things done in the city happens. I think we've all experienced over time having want of different things from the city or from DDOT, whether it be it measures of traffic calming, et cetera, and finding it hard to navigate that space. And so this is a hope that we might have some of that information to help you navigate that space, but also what you do and move forward when you don't get what you want, or when what you want isn't adequate enough. So throughout this presentation, I think Gary, you did have some points on there about I'm sorry, I think I skipped it. Keeping yourself muted. We're going to use the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and I will be either answering in the chat or bringing it to the fore, asking certain people to will unmute certain people throughout the course of this conversation to ask their own questions and maybe and have some dialogue around some certain things. But if you put it in the chat, if I don't get to it today, we'll have a transcript of the chat, and we can always come back and respond to you by email. I hope that works for everyone. With that said, Garrett, I think we are at the point where we talk about what we're doing today to get folks up to speed and where we go from here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction and kind words, Jonathan. We are tackling this training from two different parts of the country at this moment, so I haven't seen you in a while, but always good to hear your voice. Right. So as Jonathan mentioned, I'm the WABA's organizing manager, and I'm really excited to share some of the lessons that I've learned about getting things done in Washington, D.C., and especially getting changes to streets and to public spaces to make them more accessible, to make them more welcoming and safe for all sorts of people, no matter how they get around. With that, let's get to it. Forgive the order. Yeah, actually, Jonathan, I forgot about this. Turning it back to you for a moment. Apologize for that.
That's on me. Sorry, I didn't see that. This is my jam. So part of the reason that like this particular training is happening is WABA has made a commitment to ensure that we use our resources, that's our personnel and our power and privilege and access to space, that we use that in a way that ensures that we have an equitable transportation system. So WABA has been using this pointedly as how we talk about transportation equity. A transportation system in which resources like transit, infrastructure, public programs are distributed throughout communities in ways that acknowledge and address income disparities, differing physical abilities, and other factors that affect how people get around, and aim to repair the causes of harm, present day and historic oppression. An equitable transportation system is one that provides all residents low stress, affordable ways to access job centers, services, schools, parks, and each other. It ensures the safety of every road user. Let me repeat that. An equitable transportation system ensures the safety of every road user and recognizes the vital role transit and active transportation play in combating the climate crisis and addresses the ways urban planning and development have and continue to contribute to social disparities and oppression. Next, is there another slide for it?
Sorry, I think that was it, I believe.
Thank you.
Unless
If
wanna
you have
cover
any
this.
questions about, if you have any questions about the ways in which WABA is working towards our transportation equity goals, I encourage you to please email me or chat me during this meeting, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you. I'll leave my email in the chat as we progress throughout the day. All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jonathan. I think that last piece, we wanted to start with this because it really is so, transportation equity is so important to a discussion about safe streets. The notion of transportation equity is so much bigger, but I think it really does help ground us in what we're talking about here, ensuring the safety of every road user. We certainly know that the road system that we have was not built with that in mind. So in sort of the prompts that probably drew you here, we basically want to help get solutions, get fixes to some safe streets issues that you see in your neighborhood, wherever that is in the district. So before we get started on like what some of those issues specifically are, and some of the strategies to get them fixed and really get action out of the city and city agencies, wanted to spend a moment to make sure that we have some specifics in mind. This kind of exercise is always better when we have a specific thing in mind. So take a moment here. I threw down some examples here of some of the issues that we hear about a lot. Broken sidewalks, missing sidewalks, places where literally there is no safe place to walk, vegetation maintenance where the branches or grass is so high that you can't walk somewhere, and then on to more other issues like crossing the street. Are there crosswalks? Are there stop signs? Is speeding or aggressive driving really keeping you from a low stress experience around your neighborhood? Is it unsafe to bike places? Is there even an option to do that? Are there trails, but they need maintenance issues? So I want you to take a moment to think about maybe 3 issues specific around safe streets that you want to focus on tonight, so that we can hone in on those. And as you're thinking about those, we'd actually like to get you to write them down a bit. I'm going to drop a link into the chat. And I'm realizing that I probably shared my screen the wrong way. But I'm going to drop this link into the chat. This is to a Google slide. And you should all have access to that. And basically, it looks like a giant grid of Post-it notes. So we want to get a sense of what's important to you, what issues you're here to try to fix. So if you wouldn't mind, after thinking about it a bit, jump into that slide. You should be able to edit it, claim one of those Post-it notes, and jot down what are those safe streets issues that you are here to focus on. That way I can maybe tailor some of our discussion to those issues. So I'll give you just a few minutes to do that. I suppose if you really don't want to put them in the slides, yes, the chat will do. And actually, maybe just a quick, Jonathan, if you could give me a heads up. You mentioned you could see my presenter slides in the past. Am I just sharing my screen wrong? Are you seeing the chat and all the other things as well? If so, I should probably correct that before we get too long.
I am currently seeing you, and your presentation.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. Thank you. slightly different setup than I've used in the past. Okay, we got some folks tuning in by the phone. That's okay. I'll give you just a few minutes to make sure that you have the chance to dive in there. Yep, and we got some people going. Great. Just a few more minutes. And again, I put up some examples on the screen, but I definitely didn't cover everything, so feel free to jump outside of that. Okay, another 10 seconds, and then we'll get going. Great. Okay, just real quick, going to update my slides there. There we go. Okay. So just to go over a few of these, I won't read all of these, but I guess you all can see them. But what to do, we've got NPS mentioned here. We've got traffic safety around schools. I think that's a really important one. That's not just about walking and driving. It's also about, what we do with our little ones. Let's see, I suppose I should have made these Post-it notes a little bit bigger for some of you all. I see, yeah. All right, great. I'm seeing some of these in the chat. Thanks so much for sharing. Speeding, of course, is a big one, no matter where you are. And yeah, reduction in violence to encourage walking and biking. Those two issues are very interrelated, of course. Okay, well, thanks for that. I'll try to tailor our discussion to some of those. So let's get to it. All right, so we all just listed off quite a few different issues, a lot to do with safe streets, making our streets more accessible, making them safer, and more generally working for everybody. Before we get to the how, the tips and tricks for getting things done, wanted to quickly walk through sort of a menu of some of the options that are on the table for making accessible and safe streets. I share these not because some of them are rather technical. I share them not because you have to be an experienced traffic engineer to make your streets safer. Instead, I share them because sometimes we can be very focused on the solution that we know of. That intersection's unsafe, let's put a stop sign there. But in reality, streets are very widely different, and context matters a lot. So having a full sense of the menu of options that we have for making our streets and our sidewalks and our intersections and crossings safer can really help us potentially actually solve that issue. So over here on the right, have sort of an incomplete list of solutions. We'll go through some of these. I think everybody, everybody knows what a crosswalk is. Everybody can picture a stop sign and sort of where those go. But we have quite a few more options. So again, you don't need to, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. I'll try to keep it rather simple. The goal here is to give you a sense of the options, not to dive into anyone in particular. And I will stop for questions when we're done, just in case some of these are unclear. So again, these are interventions that we can ask the city to put in at a particular location to make it safer and more accessible. Some of these you may have seen around the district. In fact, I think most of these are in place somewhere around the district. So top of the list that I wanted to quickly jump through, something called left turn or center line hardening. The basic idea here is that by putting some posts and new striping and some humps in the road at the intersection, we can encourage and sometimes force a driver to take a turn at a much slower and sharper angle. This makes it much more likely that they will see pedestrians as they're crossing the road, and much more likely that they will yield to a pedestrian before driving through a crosswalk. Here's a photo of what it kind of looks like from the side. You'll notice that there are some yellow posts at the center line, and also around the curb, there are some white posts to prevent someone from driving there. Here's what it looks like from above. So on the left is sort of the before condition. You can see that a driver can take a really fast left turn in front of that pedestrian. They can cross the double yellow line, and in fact, they can take that turn at quite a bit of speed. On the right, after this stuff is installed, you see that unless they want a very bumpy ride, that driver is encouraged to take a much sharper turn, which requires them to go much slower. And there's a much better chance that they will see that pedestrian and that they will yield or stop for them. So that's centerline hardening. DC started putting these kind of treatments in maybe 3 years ago, and they've proven pretty effective, actually. They've collected data, and there are fewer crashes and less severe crashes. So it's a pretty good option. And it can be done really quickly and cheaply, because it's mostly just posts and things bolted into the ground. Another great one is curb extensions. You'll hear these called curb extensions, bulb outs. In Arlington, they call them nubs. But the basic notion here is that at an intersection, we don't actually need the full width of the roadway if it's just a parking lane. So up top, we have a before and after. This is in Adams Morgan. And the notion here is that we bring the curbs in at the intersections. And by doing so, we can actually improve visibility for drivers seeing other drivers or seeing pedestrians. We encourage slower speeds because the road is narrower and the driver has to be more careful. For pedestrians, they often love these because the distance that a person on foot or on a bike or using a wheelchair has to cross is significantly shorter, meaning they're exposed less to traffic and the risk of a car hitting them. It also improves, rates of yielding, which is great for people walking. So those are called curb extensions. These are cast in concrete. They sometimes take a while to build. But the great thing is that we don't actually have to wait for a project to put them in concrete. We can do some temporary curb extensions. These are all different examples from DC. And you'll see these are done with some flex posts and some line striping. The simplest version is on your far right. So it's basically tracing out what a curb line could be, but doing it with paint and posts. And what's really fun is these can be dressed up with a bunch of art to make them a much more vibrant and exciting part of a community. And the city actually has grant funding to bring artists to some of these locations. And we're going to get to the sort of how in just a bit. So those are curb extensions. We love these. We know what regular crosswalks are, stripes across the road, but wanted to mention that there are raised crosswalks, which is essentially putting a crosswalk and a speed hump together, either at the end of a block or in the middle of a block. These have a lovely effect of slowing down drivers, while also giving pedestrians a slower place to cross the road. These are relatively easy to put in, though the city has some frustrating rules about where they can put them to avoid ambulance routes and other major streets. But raised crosswalks are incredibly effective, either across the street or on side streets, paralleling major streets. Raised crosswalks, we love them. Still sticking with that pedestrian focus, a constant problem that we have is we have a busy street, which maybe there's a traffic signal, over there and a traffic signal over there. But the place that people want to cross the street, in addition, is right here. Maybe there's a painted crosswalk, but drivers don't yield. They don't slow down. So a great solution to that is something called the Pedestrian Refuge Island. And this basically creates a raised curb protected island in the middle of the street. And the way it's an improvement because a pedestrian can cross one direction of traffic at a time without having to, wait for a gap when there's no driver coming from either direction. So they cross to the middle, they can wait till the oncoming drivers yield to them, and then cross the second stretch. These are incredibly effective. They're relatively inexpensive. And so long as there's room for them in the middle of the street, honestly, they should be everywhere. Another great solution for helping pedestrians to get across a road safely is something called a pedestrian beacon. Now, you certainly know traffic signals. Those are the red, green, yellow, and those are all over the city. But there are definitely locations where, again, there's a desire, there's a need for people to cross the street by foot. But there are, again, some frustrating traffic engineering rules or city rules on where a traffic signal can go or how many people have to cross the street at a certain time to warrant putting in a traffic signal. And they also cost quite a bit. So there's that factor as well. But for those places where a traffic signal cannot go, pedestrian beacons are a great option. You, as a pedestrian, you get to punch a button, which starts some lights flashing. And on the left, you have something called a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. But basically, that gives you a rapid yellow flashing light. The goal there is to alert drivers, give them some more visibility for a pedestrian, say, hey, there's somebody crossing here, you should yield to them. Or on the right, something called a hawk beacon. It's a ridiculous name, but high intensity activated crosswalk. But that actually gives you a red light, which requires a driver to stop. Both are effective at improving safety, but especially those hawk signals are great for long streets. Thinking like MLK Avenue would be a great place heading up to Congress Heights for some hawk signals or hawk beacons. All right, we're getting close. Those were all about getting pedestrians and people on bikes and people using wheelchairs safely across a street. When we talk about, generally there's too much speeding on a street or we have aggressive driving, a great strategy for addressing that is looking at the driving lanes that we have and reducing them, narrowing them down to a width that encourages safer driving. We know that wider lanes encourage speeding. If a lane looks like it belongs on an interstate highway, a person driving the car might very well drive like they're on an interstate highway. Here in DC, our standard lane width is 10 feet, and there are plenty of opportunities to narrow down some travel lanes to a narrower width. Now, the benefit there, of course, is that you create space in the road to do other things with. It could make room for parking. It could make room for some bike lanes. It could make room for potentially wider sidewalks, more space for walking. So narrowing driving lanes has a proven benefit of slowing down drivers, and you get more space to do great stuff. Now that's narrowing, and I should say these animations are from a wonderful planner named Jeff Speck, who put them together. So that was narrowing driving lanes. We also have the option in many places of removing a driving lane. And counterintuitively, sometimes you can actually move the same number of cars and certainly more people if you remove a driving lane. In this case, you go from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. And adding that center turn lane actually keeps traffic moving because people who need to turn, they have a safe place to wait out of the flow of traffic so that they're not holding anyone up. Quite often this 4 to 3 conversion actually moves traffic even smoother than before. And again, you have this benefit because you've removed a driving lane, you have now some extra space to do different things with, like creating more parking if that's necessary, adding in bike lanes, or widening sidewalks, or potentially putting in some of those center median pedestrian refuges like we talked about. And I see so there are some questions. I'm going to plow on through this, and we'll try to get to the questions in just a moment. So we have narrowing driving lanes. We have removing driving lanes. Both are two great options. And a lot of this has been happening over across the district and across the region. But still, there are plenty of streets that use this 2-lane in each direction design, which really could work just as well with a center turn lane and just 1 lane in each direction. It would be change, but it could actually be quite a lot safer for all the people who have to use that street. This list wouldn't be complete, a discussion with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association without talking about protected bike lanes or standard bike lanes. These, we really love these, not just because of what they do for improving bike access and encouraging people who might be too stressed out to ride on most streets in the district, but you give them a protected bike lane and they will happily ride there. I'm talking less confident riders, I'm talking children, I'm talking women, potentially with children. Generally, you're less, you're interested but concerned riders. You build them a protected bike lane and you connect them to other places that they need to go. And suddenly those folks are happy to potentially hop out of the car and get around by bike for some, maybe even all of those trips, but certainly some. Protected bike lanes are not just good for bicycling though. They also come along with a lot of those other benefits that we've been discussing. They are often put in places where lanes are narrowed or potentially removed because they're unnecessary. They often come along with lots of pedestrian benefits. They make space for some of those pedestrian refuge islands. They also calm traffic by narrowing the street down and visually narrowing the street. So, which is why when we've looked at studies, and there have been studies around the world, protected bike lanes actually come with a drop in crashes for all road users, not just for bicyclists. Final thing that we can do is look at areas of a road or an intersection where there's really far too much space given over to a person driving, or certainly more space than is necessary to make the movements. So a great tactic that we can use to decrease speeding, decrease opportunities for aggressive driving, is to look at removing some of these extra, often vestigial driving spaces. So this might look like a very, very wide intersection where you can point the car in almost any direction and floor it. Or it could look like something that's shown on the screen, which is sort of a high-speed turn lane or a slip lane, where you have a square intersection, but a corner is cut out to allow someone to take that turn at a high speed. By reducing that angle or even removing that slip lane entirely, we can encourage drivers to take that turn, again, much sharper and much slower, and also potentially create some new space for people walking or biking or using wheelchairs or just public space to, at a farmer's market or things like that. If you start looking, you will notice these slip lanes all over the city, especially because we have so many diagonal streets that intersect a grid. There are many, many, many sort of extra spaces that are there for the convenience of getting a person in a car through there very quickly, but to the detriment of other people walking around. So those are, that was a huge menu of things that we can do. Again, the goal was not that you are now experts on traffic safety, but to give you more of a sense of just like, there are so many options that we have to make our streets safer for people driving, safer for walking, safer for people using the bus, biking, what have you. I wanted to pause there before we get into how do we get these things, just to see if there are any questions. And I'm going to ask Jonathan for your help wading through what is a rather long chat thread. Were there any questions to address?
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions there. Thank you for so much for that part of this presentation. I think one of the things that you mentioned were bike lanes and protected bike lanes. And there's a question from, I, I hate to pronounce people's, I think it's Rosie Romero. And she wants to know, what do you do when your council member is seemingly against bike lanes? And I've paraphrased her question, and I apologize for that because I'm scrolling through trying to find it back again. But the question is, what do you do when your council member has been opposed to bike lane improvements in your ward?
Sure. Well, and I think I know who you're talking about, but it's obviously an important question. These changes are not always popular to everybody, or they might come with some controversy or pushback. So I think the simple answer is we have to organize and work at it. So that's actually what we're going to be talking about in the next steps of our talk tonight. But yeah, it takes building together a coalition of folks who would, in fact, want to stand up and say, no, we want this. This is good for our community. It's not just about biking. It's about pedestrian safety. It's about driver safety. And it's about making our community more accessible to everybody who needs to use the streets. Unfortunately, in this case, it's not just about having the best argument. It's also about bringing together a coalition, a convincing coalition, to get that on the agenda.
Yep. Thank you for that. And then I think you're going to cover this in the next section, but how does one get paint on the roads, or these posts that you've been talking about that add safety, or double yellow lines? How does one go about getting any of that stuff done? But I think that's covered in the next section, so you can hold off. You can hold off on that one, but just know people are wanting to know.
It's a great question. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Anything else before we move on? I'm taking a scroll here as well. All right, great. Well, let's keep moving on then. So that was all sort of, interventions, things we can do to make our streets safer. And perhaps the thing that I should have started with is just maintenance. In quite a few places, just routine maintenance of getting a sidewalk that is crumbling repaired, getting the weeds between the street and the sidewalk mowed, or getting a crosswalk painted. So let's talk about that. Where to start? This, of course, classic, we have potholes all over the place. And potholes are a great example because they are the most straightforward in terms of what you do. So to start, we're going to talk about using the reporting tools that we have and sort of the maintenance systems from the city that are set up. We're going to talk about which agency does what, using 311 and some tips for doing that, to get results. And also a quick talk about a tool called traffic safety assessments. So yeah, I think we talked a lot about, sort of new things that we can do to a street. But quite often the issue is literally a pothole. It's in an existing road. And gee, wouldn't this space be safer wouldn't this space be safer if this pothole were just fixed? So let's get into that. First off, before you do anything, you have to have a quick sense of there are different agencies in this city and in the region that handle different things. Here's a quick list of some of the pertinent ones, but obviously the list would be exhaustive. I'm not going to read through all of these. But some of the major players are the Department of Transportation. They handle most of the things that happen on streets within the district. Certainly street signs and sidewalks, whether that's repairing sidewalks or building new sidewalks where they should be, but are not. They handle bike parking, they handle street redesigns, all the striping that goes on a street is managed by the Department of Transportation, DDOT. You also have WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority. They run all the buses in the metro, but they're responsible for bus stop locations, deciding, where a bus stop should be or where it shouldn't be. They do some maintenance on what happens at that bus stop, specifically like making sure that there's a sign there that shows you the routes and maybe the schedule. What they don't do, just as since I know we've gotten the questions about this, they don't actually manage the bus shelters that are in many parts of the city. That's actually a different organization. But they also, Metro also has a lot of metro station areas with bus loops and crosswalks and access to the metro, and that's all within WMATA. So most streets are DDOT, but if it's around a metro station, it's very possible it'll be WMATA's jurisdiction or responsibility. Department of Public Works, DPW, they're also a big player for a lot of street adjacent stuff or the maintenance, day-to-day maintenance. So they do street sweeping, they do trash collection. They collect trash in many of the public trash cans. And they do a lot of the grass mowing on sort of streets that are not in front of a private property. They also handle parking enforcement. And then finally, since we are here talking to many Ward 7 and Ward 8 residents, the National Park Service is actually a really, really big player east of the river, because most of the large parkland is actually federal parkland and is maintained by the National Park Service. And that extends to many of the roads that run through those parks. So Fort Davis Drive, Anacostia Drive in Anacostia Park, and also many of the off-street paved trails are the responsibility of the National Park Service. That's pertinent. That's important to know because they're a completely different bureaucracy than the BC government. And they're notorious for having a very, very substantial maintenance backlog, which makes getting problems fixed actually really, really difficult. This is a place where sometimes the district can help out and say, hey, we'll repave this trail or this road, or help out in these instances. But it is definitely a challenge. And some issues, some things that we want to get fixed are, I don't have much of a solution because it comes down to they don't have the staff or they don't have the resources. But those are the big main players. And I bring that up because before we can try to get an issue fixed, it's important to know who to talk to about it. Once you have a sense of the issue and the group, the agency that's responsible for it, next thing that we always want to start with is reporting an issue with 311. Now, those who have sort of been thinking about this for a while, you probably know 311 very well. You're probably rolling your eyes at me because everybody I know has made a 311 request and waited days and weeks and months and not seen anything happen. But the thing that I want to impress upon you is that sometimes it can be very effective for getting issues taken care of, and it should always be your first step when trying to get an issue resolved, whether that's a maintenance issue or even trying to get something new, a new line striping on your street, or some of these traffic calming strategies that we talked about just a moment ago. So reporting an issue with 311 is actually quite easy, but it's important that you spend some time to do it right. First off, you can do it in 3 different ways, actually 4 ways, though I don't suggest that you do things by text message, even though you can. The best ways that I've found, going to 311.dc.gov or using the 311 app on your smartphone if you have one. You can also call things in, but I found it's harder to get the specifics or the level of detail on location or the kind of issue. So best to do the report yourself on the web or with the app. A few tips for best results here. As I said, you use the website or app. There's a huge list of service request types, and I've just included a screenshot on the right here, but it's important that you get the right issue type. If you're looking for a street to be repaved, you want to select street repaving or street repair. If it's a pothole, make sure you select pothole. If it's a sidewalk repair, as shown on the screen here, you want to make sure that you click sidewalk repair. Each of these issues has a description of sort of what that issue is for, and also will give you a sense of what the turnaround time is for one of those tickets. It can be frustrating, but if you pick the wrong thing, you might think, oh, they'll just put it in front of the right person. But in fact, if you pick the wrong issue type and it's not applicable to the person who sees it, quite often those issues are closed without passing it on to anyone else. So it's good to check out what those descriptions are and make sure you're reporting it to the right place. And that can take some trial and error. If you have questions, we have quite a bit of experience with this. Feel free to pass it along. One quick tip is that the posts, if there's say a flex post that was in the street that's been run over too many times and it's no longer attached to the street, that is in fact handled under the roadway striping maintenance category, just as an example. Another tip, it's important to include as much detail in these requests as possible. You get a pretty long form, often with many, many questions. Be sure to answer all the questions, but also attach a couple of photos, one that's sort of close up and shows the issue in detail, but also one quite a few steps back so that you can help somebody who walks up to that intersection to try to assess it, that gives them a sense of where this is in the broader scheme of this intersection. Make sure that you include a lot of detail about the location. Sometimes the location reporting from within the app is not particularly accurate because it's based on addresses, and not every intersection and certainly not every piece of road has a nearby street address to tag. So, include in text like the intersection of this street and that street and a quadrant is really helpful. Oops. Double check the location, and certainly just as much detail as possible. So yeah, that should always be the first thing that you do. It can feel like a lot, but this creates a written record of this issue. It gives you a service request number that you can use to refer back to, that you can check in from time to time. And you can use that service request number, a little bit in the future to check in with agency staff if necessary, and to get progress updates if they're not put into the app. The benefit of logging in and creating an account with 311 is that it keeps all of those service requests all in one place. You can actually even see them on a map and see what's been closed and what's still open. So start with 311. 311 is terrific for maintenance issues, getting a sidewalk repair request into the system. What it's not necessarily for in all cases is for some of the sort of bigger fixes to an intersection or a safety issue, like some of the things that we talked about, improving pedestrian crossings. For that, the best tool that you want to use is something called a traffic safety assessment. Exactly how these work has changed a few times over the past couple of years, but I believe we have the most up-to-date information right here. Basically, this is it's a way for a resident, a community leader, or an organization to put in a detailed description of an issue, of a safety issue, to the city so that they can assign an engineer to come out and investigate, do some data collection, and determine if a change or a fix is needed. So it's basically a process, and it can take quite a while. Unfortunately, it can take up to 120 business days is the amount of time that they give themselves. And that's not 120 days, that's business days, so it's quite a bit longer. But the basic process here is if you have an issue, like there is a place on a major street where we need a safer crossing, where there isn't a crosswalk painted, or where the crosswalk that's painted is not enough, and we need something like a pedestrian beacon, or perhaps one of those median refuge islands would be a great solution. The traffic safety assessment is the tool that you want to use. How it works, you start by filling out a traffic safety assessment questionnaire, which is on DDOT's website, which is ddot.dc.gov/service/traffic safety assessment. It's on the screen there. But you start out with the questionnaire, and basically this asks a number of questions about what is the issue you're seeing, what time of day, what's the location, and it's a number of questions. I think it's 3 pages long. It's important that you put as much detail in there as possible, similar to a 311 request, but perhaps more detail. This is a good opportunity to describe, any crashes that you're aware of, any nearby context, like, hey, there's a school nearby and there isn't a safe crossing within, half a mile or a quarter mile, or the front door of the school backs onto a major street and there's no safe way to cross that street nearby. So again, include as much detail as possible. As part of this process, you do also need to get a letter of support from a local advisory neighborhood commissioner, typically yours, or perhaps, if it's for an area you don't live, the advisory neighborhood commissioner for that area, or a council member for that area. This is unfortunately a pretty onerous step, especially if you don't have any close ties to, if you don't have any ties, as most people don't, to their council member or even to their local advisory neighborhood commissioner. Some ANCs are more responsive and more engaged than others. But this is an important step in that it's required. But a letter of support can simply be, from that person saying, given what I know about this location, we really do need something better. Doesn't need to be, a resolution from the advisory neighborhood commission. So you fill out the questionnaire, you get your letter of support, and submit those. A DDOT engineer then comes out and evaluates the location. They compile a report. They collect data if that's necessary, and they will report back on what the actions are. Frustratingly, sometimes that report is, we're not going to do anything here because no change is warranted. But quite often it's, you're right, this is a problem, and we're going to address it in this way. So you can find more details about that at the website there, and it's a good place to start. So there we go. So 311 and traffic safety assessments, these are sort of the two things to start with. Starting with this process, you might fix your issue, or at the very least, you get the issue into the queue with other issues. If you don't go through this step, it's very likely that the issue you're trying to fix will not go anywhere. So it's important to start with this step. Unfortunately, and this is the frustrating bit, too often filling out the report is just not enough to make change. It either joins a queue of many other issues and a huge backlog. It doesn't get enough attention. It gets buried for whatever reason. But we have to start there. In cases where it doesn't actually, where we're just filling out the report doesn't get you anywhere, we escalate. So that's what we'll chat about for a little bit longer. Escalating, I like to think of, this is advocacy. I like to think of this as a volume knob. So we start, with our volume knob at 0. We've filled out a report. We've literally put a report into the system, but not done any more work to get it attention. So my ethos is always to get the most done with the least effort. We don't want to jump to the hardest and most work, most level of effort step to get a thing attention, we want to start with the easy things. So it's our volume knob. We're starting at 0 and we are turning things up slowly. Take a new step, take a new tactic. If that still doesn't do it, let's turn it up even louder. So escalating is all about turning up that volume at the right time. This is a photo of a rally that we held on K Street Northeast around the H Street corridor. This was not the first step on the volume knob. So sort of the first step for, again, focused on that traffic safety assessment or your 311 issue of a sidewalk that hasn't been repaired. You've waited a little time since you've submitted that, and either DDOT came back, or the city agency came back and said, there's no problem here, we're not going to fix it, or we recognize there's a problem, but we're not going to fix it. Your next step is really to start looping people in and building support. So, especially with DDOT, there's a couple of helpful resources that you should be aware of, and actually people there whose sole job, or at least a large part of their job, is to help make sure that things aren't falling through the cracks. So if it does seem like something's fallen through the cracks, DDOT's ward community engagement team is actually a great place to start. I should have put their emails here, but each ward has a DDOT staffer who's there to help with community engagement. These folks know the ins and outs of how DDOT works, and can take a service request number from your 311 report, or take your traffic safety assessment number and track it down, see where it is. If it has fallen through the cracks, they can help pick it back up again. And looping them in, getting in touch with them, has the added benefit of making sure that they know that there is a person in the community who cares deeply about this issue. Sometimes just a pair of extra eyes has the effect of keeping something moving. Similarly, outside of DDOT, each council member has a constituent services team. Oops, I've jumped down the list. Each council member has a constituent services team, sometimes one, sometimes multiple people, who's, again, there to make sure that they're connecting constituents like you with the city services, and that city services are being responsible. So, if you're sending emails to folks, starting by having a chat with your council member's constituent services coordinator, so that they know the ins and outs of the issue. They know the sidewalk that hasn't been repaired for potentially years. They know the intersection where it's very, very unsafe for a person getting off the bus to cross the street to where they're trying to go. The more detail you can give them, and the more involved you can get them, usually the better. And finally, a huge resource is your advisory neighborhood commissioner, or your advisory neighborhood commission. This is a much larger topic, but DC has a hyper-local form of government. Every resident has a commissioner who represents about 2,000 people, 2,000 neighbors around them. And those commissioners come together roughly every month to discuss issues about the neighborhood. By law, the city and city agencies are required to consult with these commissions on many issues affecting the neighborhood, certainly many issues about streets and other services. So these are elected people, get the chance to elect a new one every 2 years. And while they are completely volunteers and should be treated as wonderful civil servants who are putting their time into serving the community, they can also be incredibly helpful in getting the city agency's attention put into issues in the neighborhood. So looping in your advisory neighborhood commissioner, getting to know them, just like with the constituent services coordinator, making sure that they are very aware of the location, very aware of the problem, is a great first step. So looping in and building support, basically getting more people tied into local government to be aware of the issue, so that it's not just a 311 ticket sitting in a massive database. It puts your face on that 311 ticket for a bunch of people. All right. So that was step one. You know, we want to loop people in. We want to build support. This is not necessarily step two. It's not. Think of this as option two. Another great option, again, if you've gone through those steps and it doesn't seem like you're getting attention, if that issue has been pushed aside or no action is coming on it, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, working as a body, is actually a great asset that you should consider working with. So advisory neighborhood commissions, they, again, represent a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of residents, and they pass resolutions, which actually have sort of a pretty binding effect. And if an ANC passes a resolution on a particular issue that affects an agency, quite often those agencies are listening, council members are listening, and agency heads really do not dismiss an ANC resolution without a very good reason. So, you know, the best way of getting to this, again, you should be getting a good relationship with your ANC, talking it over, and that would probably be the best person to bring a resolution about the particular issue. The more specific, the better. And you know, it's a good time to also look at, you know, maybe it's not just this one particular location. Perhaps it's a couple of similar intersections nearby. Excuse me. These resolutions often is an opportunity to discuss, you know, some of the trade-offs. So almost every one of the options that we talked about for safer streets, you know, requires some trade-offs, narrowing driving lanes to make space for other uses, perhaps repurposing parking to create one of those median refuge islands or for a new bike lane. So resolution is often a good chance for that ANC to also say, you know, hey, DDOT, this issue is important to us, and also we have a sense of what some of the trade-offs are, and here are our preferences. Resolutions are great. Now, persistence is again not step number 3. It's more option number 3. You should always be persistent. Keep checking in. It's often good, you know, if you have a bunch of service requests that from 311 that are important that you don't want to lose, you know, set a schedule and check in maybe every month or every couple of months with the people involved. You know, get to know the DDOT staff who work on these things, especially that community engagement person. And here's where we have sort of a lot of options. Talk about tactics. A great thing, a really effective thing to do at this point is, you know, bring some of those people together. The staffer from your council member, invite them, bring an ANC staff, the ANC, and maybe try to get a DDOT staffer out to actually, you know, walk in that location, have a conversation while walking on that broken sidewalk or along that street where speeding is a consistent problem, so that they can experience it, so that they can get your perspective. Don't just bring them, you know, it's an opportunity to bring other members of the community, neighbors or other people who use that space. These can be a really small, you know, conversation, or they can be a much bigger thing. But really the essence of this is that you really want to find collaborators, other people in your community who find this important. Bring them together. We're turning up the volume knob. More people involved can be more effective. Now, the last step, and perhaps the more complicated of, and definitely the most complicated of the bunch, is to start what I would call a campaign. Similar to like a marketing campaign, but basically a concerted effort over a period of time to build support and build pressure to get the thing done that you're focused on. Hopefully, and I say hopefully, most of the time, this level of effort is not necessary. Hopefully, most of the time, the sort of reporting system and the process works. We, of course, know that that's not the case. But starting a campaign would be, starting a month's, over a period of time, putting together a strategy to put pressure and get leverage on the agency to get something done. The more specific, the better. So not just make our streets safer, though that could be effective, but more specifically, looking at Wheeler Road. This is a 4-lane road most of the way. It's 2 lanes in each direction. There's speeding, there are difficult crossings. And this campaign is focused on this section of Wheeler Road, between this street and this street, and these specific issues. So the more specific, the better. Now, there are tons and tons of ways to run an effective campaign, and tons of tactics that might play into a campaign. Some you probably have heard of. I mean, certainly the walk along the corridor that I just mentioned, that is a great tactic. Other effective tactics are starting a petition to collect names, in support of a campaign or in support of a particular fix to a location. Other effective tactics, rallies, or bike rides, certainly if it's something to do with biking, or even community cleanups if it's an issue about, the city hasn't been maintaining the vegetation, or the Park Service hasn't been maintaining the vegetation along a particular way that makes it inaccessible. So there are tons and tons of possible tactics that you can use to raise attention and to bring new people in to support the issue. This is a place where I did want to mention that WABA has a considerable amount of experience with this, and this is something that we're looking to support. So through a citywide effort that we recently launched this summer, we're actually working to support advocates in neighborhoods all over the city in their efforts to build out a low stress bicycling network for the city, but also to support traffic calming and traffic safety campaigns across the city, because really a street that is great for biking on should be, when it's done right, a street that is great for walking on, great for walking to the bus, and also safe for driving on. So depending on what your issue is that brought you here tonight, again, hopefully it doesn't rise to the level of you need to start a campaign. But if you do, this is definitely something that WABA wants to support you with. Quick discussion of how we can support. We have a ton of online and physical resources on effective advocacy. We have a lot of online tools for effective advocacy. So it talked about petitions or letter writing campaigns, even phone call campaigns. We have a lot of tools that we can lend to that effort for the right campaign. We're going to continue running trainings, do mentorship to share that experience, and also perhaps share our comms platforms to get more people aware of the issue that you're working on. And there's just some quick criteria of sort of what we would want to see in a campaign that we would support, and largely it's around does it fit into this low stress bike network that we've laid out. And I'm talking through this. If you're interested, I would invite you to stick around and talk about this more. But basically some basic criteria of some things we'd want to be met before we did take on supporting that campaign. But broadly, if your issue is about making streets more accessible, safer for walking, biking, driving, and everybody who needs to use that street, then it's very likely that that's something that we want to support with our resources and tools. So yeah, starting a campaign can be really awesome, a great way of building up a local community and a group of people around an issue. It is also a ton of work, but also, it can be a good jumping off point. You start a campaign fixing one issue, and suddenly all the other issues that seem to be very, very unreachable, suddenly they become lower and lower hanging fruit. Okay, I think at that point, it is a good time to sort of
Can I interject?
questions.
Can I interject right quick one thing?
Yeah.
So in the starting a campaign with WABA, I want to encourage everyone, even if you feel like, oh, I'm not sure if I can handle this, or oh, I'm not sure if I have enough bandwidth or the people, just give us a chat, because I think it's important, to note that, while some of this is huge, there may be other people that we know who are wanting to work on this and don't have people as well. And so let us know that you want to work on something. You may not feel like this fits in, does this fit into WABA's low stress bike network? Let's find out. Let's see. Let's toss your ideas out there, and let's talk about them. We're looking for ways to say yes and to support people more than anything else. So this list, don't discount yourself. It's like looking at a job application and you're like, oh, I can't do that job. Yes, you can. You can totally do this. You can totally handle this. Holler at us during this Q&A and afterwards. And we're happy to help in any way we can to get you plugged in.
Thank you so much for interjecting with that. Yes, absolutely to everything of that. We absolutely are looking to say yes. One of the key aspects of how I'm looking to support campaigns around the city is being flexible. So that there's a yes in there somewhere. And really there's a lot of resources to go around in terms of how we can support campaigns. So if there is someone like you, down on the ground who has an issue in mind, that's often the most important thing. There's someone there who really wants to see a change happen, and potentially has a little bit of time to make it happen, and to put work into it. Jonathan put that much more eloquent than I did. All right, great. So I think at this point, Jonathan, unless you have some other thoughts, I wanted to do two things. One is I want to give you all a moment to digest everything that I said, and spend some time answering questions if there are any. And two, if this idea of starting a campaign with WABA support is something that's of interest to you, we would love you to stick around after the Q&A, so that we can make sure we get your contact info, and maybe answer any specific questions you have about that, about how to get plugged into that, and what the next steps are. Yeah, so I guess, well, and I should also say, if this is something that you want to get plugged into, the next step is actually coming to our next meeting, which will be much more of a conversation, and far much less of a presentation. That is on actually next week, on Monday, August 16th, at 7 p.m. It'll be another Zoom meeting. And basically it's an opportunity to meet up with other advocates around the city, but specifically we'll break up into groups for each ward, into breakout rooms, so that you can meet some of the other advocates in your ward who are working with us. So how about we jump into questions, if there are any. So if you have a question, certainly throw it in the chat. I think is probably the easiest way. If there is if you feel like you could get the question out more articulately in words, you can throw up your hand as well. And Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind helping me out here as well.
I got you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this will help some people. Brent, I've already answered Brent's question, but I'll throw it out there for Garrett for your answer. And I think people who may have missed it, like the question is, how long does it typically take to get a solution to a problem that you address, or a campaign? How long does it typically take? A year, 2, 5, 10? And what I said to Brent was, it really depends on what the issue is. We've seen them as short as 2 weeks, and that's getting crosswalks painted, stop signs installed, and much longer timelines. Garrett, you could talk about how long the crosstown connector took, or some of the longer projects that connect the city together, right? Like, so some things are really short, can be, and some things can be really long. But Garrett, anything else there to relate?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It absolutely depends. It depends on sort of the complexity of the issue. If it is literally just a matter of getting the attention of a maintenance department on a particular spot, something like striping a crosswalk, it can be very, very quick. There is sort of one wrinkle is a frustration that I often notice, is that just looking at 311, if you report a pothole, that is guaranteed to be filled and that issue closed within 3 days. Very fast. If you report a pothole, it is going to be gone very soon. Unfortunately, most issues, really no other issue will happen that quickly, because the response to it often takes a little more planning or effort. So for things that really that 311 is set up very well to address, those can be relatively quick. What adds time is where it takes a significant amount of planning, or where the change being requested is actually a very different design or takes construction, things like that. So yeah, some campaigns can last easily, a couple of months to a year. It depends on how sort of big and different the thing is. And also, I will say that from 5 years ago, some of the changes that we fought really, really hard to make are now the same change is happening very quickly. And that goes for pedestrian safety improvements, for traffic calming, for certainly in some places protected bike lanes and trails. A long-winded answer to that question.
I'm gonna ask, this is the thing let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Sharice Ross, I'm gonna ask you to unmute, and then if you would ask the question that you have there, and if not, I'll ask it.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear
Yes.
you just fine, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, since I moved to Ward 7, I was in Ward 6 and biking everywhere. And now that I moved to Ward 7, I feel like I can't really bike anymore. And it's, I just see like issues everywhere I turn, whether it's, bike lanes where the paint isn't even there anymore, or aggressive drivers. And one of the things is like crossing over the river to be able to get to the other side of the city. And I know one of them is like crossing near down Pennsylvania Avenue to get across the Sousa Bridge to be able to, get to Capitol Hill or whatever. And I just want to know, what are some solutions to make it safe in areas where there's interstate entrances and exits on the main streets? Like, I guess you'd have to, if I go down Pennsylvania Avenue, I'm riding on the sidewalks, which isn't ideal either. So Are there any solutions to make it safer for pedestrians at those like places where like you enter 295 or something like that, where there's really, it just seems hard for pedestrians and bikers?
That's a fantastic question, and I know the spots you're talking about. Those are there is of course a side path along Pennsylvania for much of it, but then when you get closest to Minnesota and then getting under 295, it's the narrowest possible sidewalk, and so many crossing paths from cars. So I think you sort of hinted at this, is that there is no simple solution there. It's not just a matter of, getting a crew to come out and stripe a crosswalk, work that can be done in a day. That's a problem where it was literally built with this problem in, putting a highway across Pennsylvania Avenue there, an interstate, when pedestrian traffic, pedestrians crossing and bicycling crossing was just not considered and not prioritized, or frankly, the health of the broader community around there. So no, unfortunately, there's no quick solutions to it. But this is where, a more of a sustained campaign over a longer period of time focused on that issue really can move some ground, or at least would have the best chance. A 311 ticket for, create a safe bike and pedestrian crossing under 295 at Pennsylvania is unfortunately not going to go anywhere. So there are some, I would say, some opportunities and some good chances, better solutions than others. And I think some of the good ones are looking at if you aren't necessarily coming directly from Pennsylvania Avenue, but off some of the neighborhoods that connects Pennsylvania Avenue across the river, are there other connections that we can use to get people across 295, whether it's a bridge or underpasses, existing or making brand new ones, to connect folks to the trails and then get them across the river. I'm not aware of any immediate plans to change that interchange between Pennsylvania and 295. Unfortunately, I think it really would take a very big construction project with a big amount of planning beforehand to change that. I mean, there are little improvements we can push for, nibbling at the edges. But if the underpass of 295, is only so wide, there's not a ton of room to make those underpasses, safer and better for pedestrians, unfortunately. That's a much longer conversation, which I would love to have, because I think it's definitely something that needs to be fixed. I'm a fan of long-winded answers, so I apologize if that was too much. But I guess as to give you a sense of some improvement, the really large fixes are not unheard of. The 11th Street Bridge, though certainly not a without flaws, created a fantastic new connection across the river. Right now, DDOT is working on a new trail bridge, basically connecting roughly where the Arboretum is, further up the river. So it wouldn't help for that particular solution. But and the Douglas Bridge replacement is actually going to create not just a better experience for people driving, but also a fantastic experience for people walking and biking and using the trails across the river on both sides of the bridge. So big changes are possible. They just take time and and focus, I suppose.
Awesome. Amazing question. I am scrolling.
Oh, sorry. And just one last thing. If you and or some of your neighbors are interested in starting a campaign for something like that, focused on getting people safely from Pennsylvania Avenue across the river to what is coming very soon, protected bike lanes and bus lanes on Pennsylvania Avenue on the west side of the river. That's absolutely one of the sort of broad strokes campaigns that we would love to help support. So thank you for the question, and thanks for being here.
Again, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think there's a couple of advocacy folks here on the channel, both local to you, but also here from WABA. Garrett, how can people get in contact with you if they are looking to get in contact with you later or to join the meeting that is coming up on, you said on Monday?
Yes. And I will drop that info in the chat. Yeah, certainly feel free to send me an email. Just dropped my email there in the chat, and I will run and get the Zoom link for Monday's meeting. But certainly, if you're interested in getting more involved in our organizing efforts around the city, whether you're in Ward 7 or Ward 8, I should say, especially if you're in Ward 7 or Ward 8, that's what tonight is most focused on, or any other ward.
Gary, you can stop sharing the screen now.
Oh, yes, I should do that. Thank you.
While Garrett's looking that information up, if you are interested, would you just go ahead and you can direct chat me, and I can gather your information to make sure that we don't miss you and miss you sending an email to us. We can directly send the invitation to you for Monday's meeting. I got a couple of direct messages already, and I'm be sure to email those people with follow-ups. But yeah, send me a message if you are interested. We definitely want to see you there. I know sometimes we're juggling, especially at night. We're like 8 o'clock, people trying to put kids to bed and wrap up the long days. So by all means, I won't put any task on you at the present moment. You can grab that link right there. But if you don't, just shoot a direct message to me, and I'll make sure that we get you the information for that training. Garrett, they're bombing me. We've got
good.
people interested.
Excellent.
This is amazing. Thank you all so very much. Garrett, any closing words? I think we're right at time.
Yes, we are. That is fantastic. Just wanted to close by first off thanking you all for being here. Everyone's got a busy schedule, and certainly, despite the rain and the nasty weather, you could have chosen to be anywhere tonight, and you spent that time with us. So thank you for that. We would love to get your feedback, some very quick feedback on this training specifically. And so keep an eye on your email inbox. We'll be sending around a very quick survey to get some feedback and improve this for the future.
How quick of a survey is it, Gary?
It is, I believe, 3 questions plus an optional demographic survey.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you have the link for that available right now?
Do not. I should have. But as I said,
let people do it.
We'll be sharing it by email.
Okay.
But with that, if you very, very much have a question that you need to get answered right now, I'll be sticking around for 30 seconds. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night. Look forward to working with many of you in the future.
Your question doesn't have to be 30 seconds long. He's going to stay as long as you.
No, I will stick around for I'll stick around for a few if you
thank you
really
all.
Have a burning question.
Yeah, thank you all. I see Jeremiah's here. Jeremiah, you are off of you're back. You made it back safely. Taking you're not on a plane. And probably not paying attention to me. Garrett, he's still at the airport. Bless your heart. Gary, let me make sure that we can save chat. There we go. Boom. That's what I'm looking
Yes.
for.
Hi, so it's Charisse again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Sharice.
Okay. Hey, so based on what you're saying, like they're building out bike lanes on Pennsylvania Avenue on the other side of the river. When they make those decisions, like why don't they just do the whole Pennsylvania Avenue? Is it because of lack of interest or people have already complained, like no council member support? Because I know even around me, there's no bike share. I think the closest bike share that I've seen is near Minnesota Avenue. And I'm near Southern Avenue. So I guess I'm
That's
just,
a long way.
where are these, like, who makes these decisions?
Sure. So I think it's not the case that an idea was put on the table and people complained and it was taken off the table. I think in this case it's much more that the city, specifically DDOT, has sort of relatively limited resources to put into putting in new protected bike lanes and safe streets changes. And the wheel was squeakiest on Pennsylvania Avenue at a time when there was already they had a bigger project. So there was sort of an opportunity, and there was a lot of squeaky wheels saying you can't dig up this street without putting in protected bike lanes and making it accessible for everybody. Now, conversely, I think the biggest missing piece is an organized effort along Pennsylvania Avenue from folks who live near it and use it, pushing for that same thing, if that makes sense. That doesn't remove the difficulty of the massive structure of 295, but I think there are certainly some improvements that can be made without too much work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thanks for more information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think maybe to clarify a little more, the case of Pennsylvania Avenue between the Capitol and the river, it's 8 lanes wide. It's far wider than it needs to be. And that project is actually, it's not moving any curbs. It's relatively simple in that it's just changing how the lanes are striped to add in bus lanes and protected bike lanes. So it's for I guess it's 1.5 miles or so. For 1.5 miles, it's relatively inexpensive, which probably doesn't make the outcome doesn't change. But they're not moving a massive highway structure to make it happen. But again, none of that is ruling out opportunities for improving things on Pennsylvania east of the river. It's just sort of more explanation of how things got there. But truly, would love to set up a time to chat about this further and see where the opportunities are at a time when it's not just coming off the top of my head.
Hi, I have a question, and it might have been covered. Sorry, I missed a portion of it. So 2 questions. Is it 311 or DDOT? Like if just like the road needs to be painted, like the lines in the road, or like the trees need to be cut because nobody can see the signs, that type of thing?
Short answer is yes. So
Okay.
that's definitely a thing that can be reported to 311. In the case of the lines, like if lines are just faded on the road, whether it's the yellow center lines or the lane markings or bike lanes or the parking lines, that's all. If you go to 311.dc.gov, hit submit a request, and the type you're searching for is I think roadway line striping is what it's called. There's a couple of questions about like, is this for new stripes or replacing existing ones? You want to replace them. And again, including photos is really important. and a specific location. And
And
usually for that kind of thing, it's a matter of, you know, getting it in the system. Sometimes it takes up to sometimes with no other pushing takes like a year, but usually it's like a couple of weeks or even months. Sooner if you get other people's attention on it. Same with tree stuff. So long as it's a tree that the city actually owns. If it's like a overhanging tree from a private property, they may not be able to do anything about it. But if it's a tree that the city planted, you know, between the sidewalk and the road, that's something they can come and handle.
Okay. And then my second question is kind of a two-parter, and hopefully it makes sense. So where do we go? Like I don't know if you know Anacostia Park and how they're redoing the bridge.
Yes.
And they're kind of redoing it off of, I think it's Capitol Street I'm not sure. I think it's Capitol.
Yeah, South Capitol.
Yeah, South Capitol.
Anacostia
That's
Drive,
what it is.
Howard
South
Street.
Capitol, the
Howard
Frederick
Road.
Douglass Bridge, kind of right there.
Right.
So my first question is, I guess, how to find like what the final plans will look like. And two, if like I had a question or a comment on it, because there really is, if you think about it, if you're coming from Berry Farms, or if you're coming from if you're coming Summer Road, kind of, oh my God, what's that road? First Sterling. But if you're coming kind of from the Berry Farms area, I mean, it would be nice to be able to walk to the park that way and walk across the bridge, but really you can't the way it's now currently done. And I don't know if they're planning to make that walkable or accessible or bikeable to people.
So the short answer is long term. It's actually going to be pretty great for walking and biking, like when it is all done. Between now and then, there's obviously a lot of, you know, they're literally moving roadways for temporary stuff. They are required to maintain, you know, pedestrian access. If there was a sidewalk beforehand, they're required to maintain pedestrian access. Or a sort of comparable detour that doesn't put you miles out of the way. I haven't seen the most recent, you know, how construction's going over there. But the good news is that long term, and they should be finishing the bridge later this year, and the sort of stuff connecting to the bridge, I think next year, maybe the year after that. It's going to be great. And I just chatted you the website. They have a bunch of renderings there, and if you have a specific question, I think there's also a link to contact members of the project team. So if there is like a specific issue, like you used to be able to walk from one place to the other and you can't,